Hello, my name is Sarah Gustafson. Today we're going to talk about an effective search strategy for online databases, specifically when we're looking through peer-reviewed articles or scientific literature. Have you ever had a question or a problem or a project and you went into these databases finding that there are way too many results or way too few? I know I have. So today, in answer to this issue, we're going to discuss the PICOT question. The PICOT question is one of many resources that you can utilize to find only the most relevant articles in these databases. It's a systematic search strategy that pulls out only the most essential concepts of your issue and finds the most relevant information there is. Before we dive into this instructional workshop, let's discuss some assumptions and expectations. I'm assuming since you're watching this online, you have access to the internet and probably some online databases. Ideally, you've spent some time searching in the past and want to work on improving your skills. Also, I hope you have a question, a problem, or a project that you'd like to answer so that we can work on that together throughout this workshop. As I said before, my name is Sarah. I have about 10 years experience searching online databases looking for evidence-based practices specifically related to the nursing profession. I've spent about 5 years training with medical librarians on this specific topic, and I've been paid to teach and travel on these very concepts. Let's talk about what we're going to do throughout this instructional workshop. There will be 4 activities that I'm going to ask you to pause the video and participate in. In order for you to get the most meaningful experience from this instructional workshop, I strongly encourage you to pause and participate as I ask. If you need an example or help, I'll offer that as well throughout the way. Now let's get started. For the first activity, I'd like you to think back to that question, problem, or project that you need to find an answer to. During the next slide, go ahead and pause the video and briefly take a moment to write out your problem statement. We're going to use this problem statement to identify the key concepts that will formulate your PICOT question later. If you need an example, go ahead and wait to pause until the following slide, in which I provide you that example. When you're ready, go ahead then and push play and we'll move on. Welcome back. How did that go for you? Did you find it easy to think of your question? Did you get frustrated writing it back out? Or maybe it was kind of hard to come up with something. I hope the example I provided you got your mind thinking about what we could possibly look at in the online databases. Now that you have your question and maybe a little frustration, let's talk about what we can do with that. Here are the learning objectives for today's workshop. I'll go ahead and let you read over those. It's important for you to know that our goals for you are to be able to differentiate between the PICOT question and your project. Oftentimes we think we know the answer before we begin searching, but the PICOT question helps us find the most relevant information that then provides the evidence in answer to our project. Also, I want you to be able to utilize the PICOT question to find only the most relevant articles pertinent to your project. Hopefully by the end of this workshop, with the examples and template I have provided to you, you'll be able to become better at this process. Let's move on. There are 5 components to the PICOT question. Each letter of PICOT represents those components. P stands for population. These are the group of people that are most impacted by your problem or your question. Moving on to I, intervention, these are the changes that you want to make. Ideally, your intervention has a C, comparison, so that we can see if option A or option B works better. O stands for outcome. This is what happened after your intervention or after your comparison. We want our outcome to be very measurable so that it relates to our problem. Finally, the T stands for time. It's important to understand that this intervention can happen within a time frame, but it doesn't have to. The T in the PICOT question is not always necessary, and we'll talk about when to use it if it's relevant. When thinking about our population and outcome, you must consider that the two should be related. For instance, I wouldn't want to ask a question about women and then look at the outcome of children. Additionally, our intervention and comparison must be close enough related that the outcome measurement is similar. Now that we've discussed the 5 components of the PICOT question, let's walk through the example I provided earlier after the first activity. In this example, we see the question is about what medications are best for a diabetic. Now, do you remember the 5 components of our PICOT question? What each of them were? Let's begin with the P, our population. Here we see that these interventions have to do with a type 2 diabetic. Moving on, we're trying to figure out which medications are best for her. So our intervention would be the metformin, and our comparison would be insulin. Finally, we're most concerned about how it controls her blood sugar. So our outcome to be measured in our PICOT question is blood sugar. For this specific PICOT question, we aren't interested in necessarily how much time it takes, just whether the medications are effective. It's important for us to remember that when we're creating a PICOT question, our terms need to be specific and searchable. Ideally, they are 1 to 2 words only. As you can see here, we could have said metformin pill. However, all metformin comes in the form of a pill. Therefore, it's only necessary to say metformin. Additionally, when identifying the comparison, we could say insulin injection. However, if she's using it at home, all insulin would be injectable. So we'll go ahead and consider insulin all by itself. It's important for us to consider that the PICOT question should be clear and concise. We want to identify very specific searchable terms. This will allow us to find only the most pertinent information in the results. Now that we've identified the components of the PICOT question, I want to remind you that the PICOT question is a search strategy. It is not your project. The PICOT question is clear and concise and provides a systematic method for searching in online databases. It's not to prove a point, and you may or may not already know the answer. What's most important is that you get all of the most relevant information on your topic so that you can perform an evidence-based decision. Did you catch that? The PICOT question is not your project. It is simply an effective search strategy for online databases. It helps you to gather all of the relevant evidence and determine what the best practices are. Now let's think back to the 5 components of our PICOT question. Do you remember what's supposed to be related to the population? It's the outcome. Our population and outcome need to be related. Also, the intervention and comparison should be able to be measured with the same outcome. If you honor this relationship between the PICOT elements, you have created an effective search strategy to gather the most relevant information for your project. Now, I'd like you to pause the recording and go back to your problem statement from earlier. See if you can identify the 5 components for the PICOT question in your project. This is our PICOT question template. If you think back to our example earlier, our population was type 2 diabetics. Our intervention was metformin, and we are comparing this to insulin. We want to know how they affect blood sugar. And the time was not relevant for our example. So our PICOT question reads, in type 2 diabetics, how does metformin compared to insulin affect blood sugar? You can use this template to assist you in selecting specific and searchable terms. In our next activity, I'm going to show you how we can search the database with our PICOT question. Now that we've identified what your problem, your question, or your project is, and we've written out that problem statement, identifying the components of the PICOT question and filled them into our PICOT question template, let's talk about how we can utilize the PICOT question in our online database searching. For today's example, we're going to utilize the PubMed database. Now, you may not have access to the PubMed database. You might be using Google Scholar, the Cochrane Library, or maybe an EBSCO-host. Still, the fundamentals of searching in online databases using the PICOT question are very similar. So let's go ahead and fill in our 5 components. You may remember from our example earlier. Our population was type 2 diabetics. We're going to combine our terms using the word and. Our intervention was metformin. Our comparison was insulin. And our outcome was blood sugar. You'll remember the T was not relevant for our project, so we've gone ahead and left it out. Now let's hit search. As you can see here, I've automatically applied some other limiting factors here on the side. I only wanted the full text that's available right now, and I'm only looking at publications within the last 5 years. Our results here found us 372 findings. Scrolling through down here, it looks like we have articles that relate mostly to type 2. All of these seem to be addressing metformin and insulin. Now let's go back up to the top. Say we decided not to include our population. Let's see how that affects our results. Our number jumps way up to 552. And scrolling through here very quickly, we see we've unintentionally included gestational diabetes and type 1 diabetes and possibly even exercise-induced diabetes. So we'll go ahead and put our population back in there to get more of those relevant results that are pertinent for our project. Let's look at another scenario where possibly we left out our outcome. Let's see how that affects our results. Here we get even more results, 939. Man, I can't imagine looking through each and every abstract trying to figure out which apply to my project. So this is why the PICOT question is a quick and easy way for us to search the literature and find only the most relevant articles for our project. There's one more thing I want to address earlier. We talked about how our PICOT questions need to be specific and maybe only utilize 1 or 2 terms if necessary because we want them to be concise and easy to search. Say we had included metformin pill and insulin injection. Let's see how that affects our results. There are none at all. You'll easily find that when you apply too many words in your search box, you'll end up with nothing, or you'll end up with things that don't apply at all. So let's make sure that our PICOT questions are very well written, that we've honored that relationship between our population and our outcome, we've provided an intervention and comparison that are relatable, and we've utilized only the most essential and basic terms. Now that I've showed you how to utilize your PICOT question in an online database, I'd like you to pause the video and spend some time searching your PICOT question to see if you can find the answers you're looking for. Welcome back. How did it go? Did you find what you were looking for? Are you feeling pretty good about this whole process, or are you overwhelmed and maybe a little frustrated? The important thing is that you know what the PICOT question is. You now have the tools you need to have specific and searchable questions, and you can find answers with these questions. Now, I know some of you may have found exactly what you're looking for. Hopefully you feel like you've improved on this process. Others of you I know will probably have struggled through this. I want you to realize that this process takes time and practice. Be patient with yourselves as you learn this new skill. Now, some of you may feel pretty proficient when searching PICOT questions, and I challenge you to go ahead that next step. If you found what you were looking for, make those evidence-based practice decisions. If you didn't find what you were looking for because it simply isn't out there, I encourage you, be part of the solution. Work on researching those answers and publish so the rest of us can find them. Now you have the tools needed to be effective in searching online databases. Thank you for taking the time of working through this workshop today. Great job.